They folded my chair while I was still standing there. 9 years unpaid, and 2 signatures that were never mine. She folded my chair while I was still standing in the room, not after I left, while I was still standing there in my work shoes, with a duffel bag at my feet. She pulled the folding chair out from the end of the kitchen table, pressed it shut, carried it to the hall closet, and leaned it against the wall, the way you put away a thing that is finished being used. Then, she said the sentence she had been saying to me for 9 years. Family doesn't send a bill. 9 years. I worked in my family's business, 60 hours a week. Nights, weekends, Christmas mornings. I was never paid $1. Here is what nobody in that kitchen knew I had already worked out. That business was not theirs. On paper, it was mine. My name on the state filing. My name on the license. My credit sitting underneath all of it, like a floor, and 2 of the signatures inside that company's file cabinet were not mine. I had never once been in the state on the days they were signed. I walked out of that house with $41 and a gas card that stopped working at the second pump. Today, getting your name back is what I do for a living. I sit in a small office in Denver with people whose families spent them, and I walk them through the paperwork that takes their name back, 1 page at a time. I have done it for 106 strangers. Last spring, I finally opened my own file. My name is Nora Calloway. I am 34 years old. And if you have ever been the one everybody counted on and nobody counted, stay with me, because the leash they put around my neck turned out to be the only witness I had. I need to take you back to that morning, because everything in this story is going to be measured from it. That morning is my flag. It was a Tuesday, 6:20 in the morning. Reno, Nevada. A kitchen with a table that seated 6, and a folding chair on the end for me. And to make you understand what happened in that kitchen, I have to start 9 years before it. When I was 19 years old, and I signed something I did not read. 9 years before that morning, my mother, Rhonda Calloway, came into my bedroom holding 2 sheets of paper and a pen from a bank. She sat on the edge of my bed. She was not angry. My mother is never angry. That is the first thing you need to understand about her, and it is the thing that took me the longest to learn. The people who take the most from you are almost never the ones shouting. They are calm. They are organized. They are, in their own words, only concerned. She said, the family was starting something, a home care agency. Aides who go into old people's houses, the ones who are not sick enough for a nursing home, and not steady enough to be alone. Bathing, medications, meals, rides to dialysis. She said there was money in it, because there is always money in old people. And she said it the way you would say there is always money in Christmas. She said there was a form, a state form, as, she said, you are 19, you have no debts, and you have a clean record. It is easier if the paperwork sits with you. It is just a formality. Nora, I signed both pages on my own bedspread. It took me maybe 12 seconds. I did not read them. Here is what that piece of paper was. In plain words, it was the articles of organization for a Nevada company, the birth certificate of a business, the single sheet estate files when a company becomes real, and on the line where a company names the one human being who owns it, controls it, and answers for it. My mother had typed my name, not hers, not my father's, mine. From that day, in the eyes of the state of Nevada, Calloway Family Care was 100% my company. Every dollar it borrowed, every tax it failed to pay, every rule it broke. The state would come looking for the name on that page. I found this out 9 years later. I am telling you now because I want you to feel it sitting under everything else that happens. The way it sat under me. They call that paper the articles. Hold on to it. It comes back. Hey, 8 years before that morning, my mother gave me the only thing I ever received from that company. It was a fuel card. Blue plastic. A magnetic strip. The name of a gas station chain across the front. And Callaway Family Care embossed under it in white. I remember the first time I asked about a paycheck. It was a Sunday, and I had just driven a client named Mr. Hollis to an emergency room in Sparks and sat with him for 6 hours because his son did not answer his phone. I came home at 2 in the morning. My mother was at the table with her binder. I asked when I would start getting paid. She did not look up. She said, we were all in a lean season. She said, my father had put the house up as security to get the vans. She said, Kendra, my older sister, had a mortgage and a child. She said, I lived at home and ate their food and drove their vans. And what exactly was I planning to spend it on? Then she looked at me and she said it. And I want you to hear the calmness in it. Family doesn't send a bill. And she slid the blue card across the table. To me, I took it. I actually said, thank you. That is the part I have never told anyone until right now, that I said, thank you. For the next 7 years, that blue card was the only money I touched. I could not buy a coffee with it. I could not buy a coat with it. I could put gas in a company van. And that was the entire universe of what I was permitted to do with money. If you have ever been handed a thing that was designed to keep you moving without ever letting you leave, you already know what that card was. It was a leash. Stay with me, because that leash is the reason I am telling you this from an office instead of a courtroom. 6 years before that morning, I met a woman who changed how I understood the word stay. Her name was Dolores Hatch. She was 80 when I met her, and she lived alone in a small yellow house on the east side of Reno with a spiral notebook by her bed, because she said her memory was not a thing she trusted anymore, and she wanted a record of who came and when. I was her night aide, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., 4 nights a week, for 6 years. The first night, I stood next to her bed to take her blood pressure, and she told me to sit down. There was no chair in that room. There was a chair in the hallway, a metal folding chair the last agency had left behind. So I went out into the hall, and I carried it in, and I opened it, and I sat down. I did that every night, for 6 years. In the hall, open it, sit down. I want to be careful here, because this is the one part of those 9 years I will not let anybody take away from me. I loved that work. I was good at it. I knew which of my clients could not swallow pills dry, and which ones were pretending they could. I knew which ones cried at 4 in the morning, and needed you to pretend you had not noticed. The company was a lie, and my mother was a lie, and the work was the only true thing in the building. That matters later. Remember it, because here is the mini detail I want you to file away, and I promise you, I will come back to it. Dolores wrote down who came and when, every night, in a spiral notebook, 80 years old, and she kept better records than a licensed healthcare company in the state of Nevada. 4 years before that morning, I found a page in the printer. We ran the office out of a converted garage behind my parents' house. There was one printer, and it jammed constantly, and whoever fixed it inherited whatever had been sitting inside it. That afternoon, what was sitting inside it was a payroll summary. I want to slow down, because this is the beat where the floor moved. There were 9 names on it, every aide we employed, and what they were paid. $15 an hour for a new aide, 17 for the 2 who had been there longest. My sister Kendra was on that page. She had a title, Director of Operations. She had a number next to her title, and the number was $52,000 a year. Kendra came into the office 3 days a week. She posted photographs of our vans on the internet. She had never once put a person into a bathtub, and then, at the very bottom of that page, under a line that said member draw, was my name. The number next to my name was 0, not blank, not missing. Somebody had typed a 0. I stood in that garage, holding a warm sheet of paper, and I did the arithmetic that I had spent 9 years refusing to do. Let me do it for you now, the way I finally did it for myself, so you do not have to. 60 hours a week. 9 years. At $15 an hour. The number my mother paid a stranger who had known those clients for 2 weeks. $420. $1,200. That is not a paycheck I missed. That is a house. In the town I grew up in. That is a whole house. Paid off. And then most of a second one. I did not confront anybody. That day, I put the page back in the printer tray. And I went and did a shift. I want you to understand why. Because I know what you are thinking. I know exactly what you are thinking, because I have said it out loud to my own clients since. Why didn't you just leave? Because on that day, I did not yet know that the company was mine. I thought I was the family charity case. I thought I was in their debt. I did not know I was standing on the trapdoor. I thought I was standing on the floor. I would find out 14 months later, and it would take a letter from the state of Nevada to tell me. 3 years before that morning, an envelope came addressed to me. It came from the Nevada State Agency that licenses home care companies, certified mail. My mother brought it in from the box and set it on the kitchen table and went to fold laundry. And she did not look at it, and that should have told me everything. It was a citation, a formal finding after an inspection that Calloway Family Care had failed to keep required visit records for a period of 11 months and had billed for 4 visits that no aide had documented. The letter did not say, "Dear Mrs. Calloway." It did not say, "Dear family." It said, "You are the responsible party." And under that, it listed a fine and a deadline, and my name spelled correctly with my middle initial. I stood in the kitchen, holding it. My mother came back through with a laundry basket on her hip and looked at the letter in my hand and said, without stopping walking, "That is just how the state addresses these. It is the filing name. It doesn't mean anything, honey." And she was so calm. She was so completely, catastrophically calm. That is when I went out to the garage, and I opened the file cabinet, and I found the folder with the state paperwork in it, and I read the articles for the first time in 6 years. My name, sole managing member. My signature, from a bedspread, when I was 19. I sat down on the concrete floor of that garage, with my back against the cabinet. And here is the thing I need you to sit with. What I felt was not rage. It was arithmetic. Because if the fine was mine, then the vans were mine, and the payroll was mine, and the taxes were mine, and every single thing that company had ever done or failed to do had been quietly stacked on a 19-year-old's name for 9 years. And they had been paying my sister $52,000 a year to post photographs of it. I did not sleep that night. I worked a shift. I sat in a folding chair in a yellow house and watched an 86-year-old woman breathe. And at some point around 4 in the morning, Dolores opened her eyes and looked at me and said, "You are not here." I said, "I am right here." She said, "You've got your body here and your ledger somewhere else, and I have been alive long enough to know the difference." I told her I was going to ask my mother something in the morning. She said, "Then ask it standing up." I did not ask it standing up. I want to be honest with you. I waited 5 more months because I was scared, and because I loved my clients, and because when you have been raised inside a thing, leaving it feels less like walking out a door and more like cutting off your own hand and hoping it grows back. Which brings us to that morning, the Tuesday, 6:20 a.m., the morning. Mamitain, I had just come off a double, 22 hours. I had done a night with Dolores, then covered a day shift in Sunday Valley because an aide called out, and I got back to my parents' house at 6 in the morning with the smell of another person's house still on my sleeves. My mother was already at the kitchen table. She was always already at the kitchen table. Coffee, reading glasses, and the binder. My father was standing at the counter with his back to the room, doing the crossword on his phone. He is in this story the way a wall is in a story. He was there. He held it up. He never once said a word that cost him anything. I put my keys on the table. I did not. Sit down, I said. I need my name off the company. My mother turned a page in the binder. She said, "Sit down. You look exhausted." I said, "I got the citation from the state. I read the articles. I have been the owner of this business since I was 19 years old, and I have never been paid. And I want my name off it. And this is where I want you to watch her. Because this is the whole woman in about 90 seconds." She did not raise her voice. She took her glasses off, and she folded them, and she set them down on the binder, and she looked genuinely, warmly sad for me. She said, "Is that what you think of us?" Not a question. She does not ask question. Then she reached into the binder and pulled out a single sheet of paper and turned it around and slid it across the table toward me with 2 fingers. It was a list. Typed, itemized, downed, dated in a column, down the left side. Braces, $6,200. Private school tuition for 2 years, $11,000. Car, $4,300. Insurance, groceries, calculated per month for 18 years. Utilities, divided by 4. There was a line. I am not going to forget this line. That said emergency room. Age 7, stitches. Forehead. At the bottom of that page in bold was a total. $91,000. She let me read the whole thing. She let me stand there and read every line. And she did not say a word until my eyes reached the bottom. Then she said, "Family doesn't send a bill, Nora." And she tapped the page once with her finger. "But if you want to talk about money, we can absolutely talk about money." I have thought about that moment for 4 years. I have thought about it while driving, while brushing my teeth, while sitting across from strangers in my office who are describing their own version of it to me and looking at the floor. While they do it, here is what I have decided it was. It was not an argument. It was an invoice. She had it printed. She had it dated. It had been sitting in that binder, and I want you to understand what that means. It had been sitting in that binder before I walked into the room. She had prepared it. She had typed it and printed it and filed it and waited, possibly for months, for the day I would finally ask, so that when I did she could hand me a number and watch me understand that in this family, love was a balance sheet, and I was in the red. I did not cry. I want to be very clear about that, because there is exactly one time in this story that I cry, and it is not here. I said, "Take my name off the company." My mother put her glasses back on and returned to her binder and said, "Then you can go find out what your name is worth on its own." My father did not turn around. I went upstairs. I put clothes into a duffel bag. It took 11 minutes. I came back down through the kitchen, and my mother was standing at the end of the table, and she had already folded my chair. She was carrying it to the hall closet. While I was still standing in the room, she set it against the wall. She closed the door on it. She said, "The vans are the company's." I said, "The company is mine." She said, "Then take one and see how that goes for you." I did not take one. I want you to know why. Because in about 4 years, this becomes the single most important decision I ever made. I did not take one because I did not want to be the one who broke a rule. Not one. Not even a small one. Even that morning, standing in that kitchen with a duffel bag, some part of me already understood that the only way I was ever going to win against people who ran everything through paperwork was to be more correct than they were, for longer than they could stand. I walked out with a bag, $41 in cash, and a blue fuel card in my back pocket. I drove my own car, a 2009 Corolla, with 190,000 miles on it, which I had bought myself with a graduation check from a grandmother, who is not in this story because she died before she could see any of it. I stopped at a gas station on Kietskate Lane at 6:51 a.m. I put the blue card in the pump. It was declined. I drove to a second station a mile down the road because I told myself the first machine was broken, which is a thing you tell yourself when you are 28 years old and you have just been priced by your own mother. I put the card in. Declined. She had canceled it from the kitchen table in the 11 minutes. It took me to pack a bag. I want to tell you that I threw that card in a garbage can in the parking lot of a gas station on Kietskate. I did not. I put it back in my pocket. I still have it. It is in a drawer in my apartment in Denver, and it is going to matter more than anything else in this story. And I did not know that for 2 more years. If you have ever been cut off mid-sentence by someone who was supposed to love you, cut off financially, cut off from a house, cut off from a family group, chat, cut off from a table, I would like you to do something for me. Put the word unpaid in the comments. Just the one word. I am not asking for your story. I want to see how many of us there are. 6 weeks after Amazon, I slept in the Corolla for 19 nights. I am not going to make that beautiful for you. It was a parking lot behind a 24-hour laundromat in Sparks, because a laundromat has a bathroom and a light on all night. And if a woman is sitting in her car at 3 in the morning, nobody asks her anything. I washed my hair in a sink. I ate food that costs less than $1. I applied for 41 jobs in 19 days, and I want you to notice that number, because I have. I got one. Night dispatcher at a regional freight company, off the interstate. $10 an hour, 6 p.m. to 4 a.m. And the interview lasted 4 minutes, because the only question that mattered was whether I could stay awake. And I had spent 6 years proving that in other people's bedrooms. The woman who trained me was named Ruthie Pike. She was 61. She had been on nights for 22 years. She had reading glasses on a chain, a photograph of a dog taped to her monitor, and a thermos he referred to as her husband. Ruthie did not ask me anything for 3 weeks. That is the entire reason I am still standing. Then one night around 2 in the morning, in the flat dead hour when nothing moves on a freight board, she said, without turning her head, "You are sleeping in that Corolla." I said, "Only some nights." She said, and that was the whole conversation for another 20 minutes. Then she said, "What did they take?" Not what happened. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "Have you thought about calling them?" What did they take? And I told her all of it, in the wrong order badly, for maybe 40 minutes, with a freight board glowing in front of us and nobody else in the building. Ruthie did not fix it. She did not tell me to forgive them. She did not tell me to get a lawyer, which I could not have afforded. and she did not tell me it would be all right, which would have been a lie. She waited until I was completely finished. Then she picked up a pen and she pushed a yellow legal pad across the desk to me, and she said the sentence that I have now said out loud to 106 other people in a small office in Denver. She said, "Write down what they took, not to get even, so that on the day they tell you it never happened, you will have a witness, and the witness will be you." I wrote for 2 hours that night. I have not stopped. The rebuild in a hurry, because you already know I survive. 8 months after that morning, I had a room in a house in Denver with 4 other people and a rule sheet on the refrigerator. I owned 1 chair. It was a folding chair. Somebody had left it in the alley, and I carried it up 2 flights of stairs, and I opened it in the middle of an empty room, and I sat down in it, and I looked at 4 bare walls that were mine. You can laugh, Wafton. I did. I sat in a folding chair in an empty room and laughed like an idiot for about 10 seconds. And then I did not laugh again for a while. 14 months after that morning, I started night classes at a community college on a payment plan in bookkeeping, because I had learned exactly one thing about the world, and it was this: the people who beat you are the people who understand the paperwork. And I was done being on the other side of that. 2 years after that morning, I had a certificate, a $9 an hour raise, and $140 a month going into a savings account, and I decided to rent an apartment of my own. I want you to stay with me for the next 90 seconds, because this is where the story turns. And everything, before it was only the reason it could. The rental office was on the ground floor of the building. Beige carpet. A woman with a laptop. She ran my credit while I sat there with a folder of pay stubs in my lap, and I watched her face do a thing that faces do. She turned the laptop around. There was a business line of credit in my name. $41,000. Borrowed. Charged off. Which means the bank had stopped waiting and written it off as a loss. And sold it. And someone else was chasing it now. There was a default judgment against me from a Nevada court. That is a court deciding a case against you when you never showed up, because you never knew there was a case. By then, the number had grown to $47,300, and under it, a second line. Unpaid payroll taxes, $18,400. Assessed against the person the state had identified as the responsible party for a company called Callaway Family Care. I asked her to print it. She said she was not supposed to. I said, "Please." She printed it. How isoun I fand. I want to be accurate about what happened next, because I have told this story to a room of 90 people, and I have never once dressed it up. I walked out of that rental office. I walked across the street to a parking garage. I got into a 2009 Corolla on the 3rd level, and I closed the door and I sat there, holding 4 warm pieces of paper, and I cried for about 6 minutes. That is the only time in this entire story that I cry. It is the only time I have cried since. It happened alone, in a car, in a concrete garage in Denver, holding a piece of paper, and I am telling you about it because the version of this story where I am strong the whole way through is a story I would not believe either. Then I stopped. I wiped my face with the sleeve of a work fleece, and I did the first correct thing. I looked at the date the line of credit was opened. It was a Thursday in March, 2 years after that morning. And on that Thursday in March, I was 950 miles away, clocked into a freight dispatch desk in Denver, Colorado. From 6 p.m. to 4 a.m., I had never signed it. Somebody in Reno had put my name on a $41,000 loan, and a notary had watched them do it, and stamped it, and made it real. Stay with me. This is where I stop being the one it happens to. Why I waited 2 more years. I know what that looks like from the outside. I had proof, and I sat on it. Here is the truth, and it is not flattering. I went to a lawyer 3 weeks later with my 4 warm pieces of paper. He was kind. He gave me 45 minutes. He did not bill me for. And he told me 2 things. The first was that yes, this was almost certainly identity theft and forgery. And yes, a court would care. The second was that I could not prove a negative. I could stand in a courtroom and say I did not sign this until my voice gave out, and my mother could stand in the same courtroom and say, calmly, warmly, sadly, that of course I signed it, that I had been a member of that company since I was 19, that here were the articles with my real signature on them, and that her daughter was struggling and had made some accusations. He said, "You do not need to prove. You did not sign it. You need to prove who did." Then he told me what that would cost, and I did the math on a folding chair that night. And the answer was 7 years of savings I did not have. So I did the only thing available to a person with no money and a long memory. I got closer to the paperwork. 3 years after that morning, I took a job at a legal aid office in Denver as an intake assistant, $12 an hour. I sat at a front desk and handed clipboards to people whose lives had been taken apart by a document, and I watched attorneys take those documents apart in return. 4 years after that morning, I was a certified financial crimes victim advocate. That means I am the person who sits with you when your name has been stolen and turns it from a nightmare into a checklist. Affidavits, bureau disputes, police reports, hound, petitions. I am not a lawyer. I am the person who makes sure the lawyer gets a folder they can win with. I learned the system from the inside, on the clock, legally, for 4 years, while a $47,000 judgment sat on my name like a stone. And in my second year there, an attorney said something in a training session, offhand, about a company's records. She said that in most states, a person listed as the owner of record of a company has a legal right to inspect that company's books and records on written demand, whether or not the other people running it want them to. Because you cannot be the person who answers for a company and be locked out of it. I sat in that room with a cup of coffee going cold in my hand. They had made me the owner to protect themselves, and the owner has a right to the books. 9 years. They had used my name as a shield. The name was still mine. The demand. 4 years and 4 months after that morning, my attorney. I had one by then. I had paid for her myself. Over 11 months, out of a legal aid salary, sent a written demand for the books and records of Callaway Family Care, Limited Liability Company, to its registered office in Reno, Nevada. It was 2 pages. It was extremely polite. It cited the statute, and it gave them 14 days. I want to say something here about how this was done, because it matters, and because I have watched other people burn their own case to the ground doing it wrong. I did not use my job. I did not open a file at my office. I did not pull a single record through a work account, or ask a single colleague for a favor. My employer knew, in writing, from the beginning, and I was walled off from anything that touched it. I took vacation days for the phone calls. I paid my own attorney. Every request I made as a private citizen, with a fee and a receipt and a date, because the entire thing they had ever had over me was that I was the reckless one, the unstable one, the daughter who was struggling and had made some accusations. I was not going to hand them one true sentence. On day 13, my mother's lawyer produced the records. He had to. That is what a statute is. They arrived as 4 boxes. My attorney and I opened them in a conference room on a Saturday. And we were in that room for 11 hours. And we ordered food twice. And did not eat it. There were 3 things in those boxes. Page 1. The articles. The first thing was the articles. My birth certificate of a business. I had seen it before, on a garage floor, 3 years before that morning. But this time, it came with something stapled behind it that I had never seen. An annual filing, submitted to the state every single year. 9 of them. 9 years of my mother filling out a form that asked, "Who owns and manages this company?" and typing my name. She did it the year I was living in her house working for free. She did it the year I asked for a paycheck. She did it the year I slept in a Corolla behind a laundromat. She filed it 11 days after she folded my chair. There is no version of this where she did not know. There is no version where it was a filing name. There is no version where it did not mean anything. Honey, page 2. The fuel logs. The second thing was 5 years of statements from the gas station chain. Every transaction, on every company. Fuel card, card number, date, time, station address, gallons. There were 1,640 entries on my card. Sit with that for a second. Because I had to. 1,640 times. I put gas into a van for a company that told me it did not owe me a thing. But here is what those statements actually are. And it took my attorney about 9 seconds to see it, and about 9 hours to stop smiling about it. They are a time card. 2:11 a.m. A station on Wells Avenue. 5:40 a.m. A station near the hospital in Sparks. 11 p.m. on Christmas. 6 a.m. on the 1st of January. 4:15 in the morning, over and over and over. For 5 years. In a pattern that no reasonable human being could look at and call a family member helping out around the house. They put a leash on me, so they would always know where I was. And a leash, it turns out, is a logbook. That blue card in a drawer in my apartment. The one that was declined at a pump on Kayetsky Lane, and that I could not make myself throw away, was the single most complete record of my life anyone had ever kept. And they kept it, and they handed it to me in a cardboard box. Because a statute told them to. And it did not stop there. Because a company that bills a state for home care visits has to document those visits. And Callaway Family Care's documentation was so thin, the state had already cited it. But mine was not thin. Every fuel entry lined up against a client address. And in a yellow house on the east side of Reno, an 88-year-old woman named Dolores Hatch had been writing down who came and when in a spiral notebook for 6 years because she did not trust her own memory. My attorney subpoenaed nothing. She wrote Dolores a letter and asked. Dolores mailed us the notebooks herself. All 6. In a padded envelope with a note that said, "I knew these were for something." 60 hours a week, 9 years, at the $15 an hour. They paid a stranger $420, $1,200. That is what my mother put a $91,000 invoice in front of me to keep me from ever asking about. If you have made it this far with me, and something in your chest is doing what mine did in that conference room, hit the subscribe button now while you are feeling it. Not for me. Because this next part is the reason I still tell this story out loud. Page 3. The notary book. The third thing was the file on the line of credit, the $41,000. And clipped to the loan agreement was a copy of a notarial certificate. That is the little block at the bottom of an important document where a notary, a person the state licenses to watch you sign things, swears that you personally appeared in front of them, that they checked your identification, and that the signature is really yours. The stamp said, "A notary in Washoe County, Nevada, A woman who is my mother's cousin. I am not going to give you her name. She is a role in this story, not a person. A notary in Nevada is required to keep a journal, a bound book. Every signing gets a line, the date, the document, the identification presented, and the signature and the thumbprint of the person who signed. And by law, that journal line can be obtained on written request. My attorney requested it. It came back on a single photocopied page. Line 14. Waitan. A Thursday in March. Document. Personal guarantee. Commercial line of credit. Signer. Nora Calloway. Identification presented. Nevada driver's license. Number listed in full. And here is where the entire 9 years came apart. And I want to give it to you slowly. That Nevada driver's license had been dead for 11 months. I had surrendered it in Colorado at a Department of Motor Vehicles office on a Tuesday afternoon when I got a Colorado license instead, because that is what you do when you move to a state and you intend to stay. And when you surrender a license, the state you left keeps a record of the day you stopped existing there. 11 months before that notary wrote my name in her book, the number in her book had stopped being a real license. She had either not checked it, or she had known. And next to that line, pressed into a small inked square on an official state journal, was a thumbprint. Not a signature, a thumbprint. Because Nevada requires one. It was not mine. My sister Kendra has been a licensed home care aide since she was 23 years old. And in order to be one, in order to be allowed into a house where a person cannot get out of bed alone, the state of Nevada requires you to be fingerprinted. They took her prints so she could be trusted with old people. They were on file with the state the whole time. The system that let her into those houses is the system that put her at that notary's table. I did not compare those prints. I want to be extremely precise, because this is the part people get wrong when they tell this story back to me. I did not investigate my own sister. I am not a police officer, and I would have destroyed the case if I had touched it. I filed a report. I signed a sworn affidavit that I did not sign that guarantee and had not been in the state of Nevada on that date. I attached a dispatch payroll record showing I was clocked into a desk in Denver from 6 p.m. to 4 a.m. I attached a certified record showing my Nevada license had been surrendered 11 months earlier. And then I handed the whole thing to people whose job it is. And I went home, and I sat in a folding chair, and I waited. 9 weeks later, an investigator from the Nevada Secretary of State's office called me and asked me one question. He said, "Miss Calloway, does anyone else in your family have a fingerprint card on file with this state?" I said, "2 of them do." He said, "Thank you. That is all I needed." The quiet reckoning. They came to me. I did not go to Reno. I never went back to Reno. I want that on the record, because for 4 years I imagined a version of this where I walk into that kitchen and say something devastating. And I want to tell you that when the moment actually arrived, the last thing on earth I wanted was to be in that room. On a Wednesday in April, at 11:40 in the morning, the woman at the front desk of my office, the desk I used to sit at, put her head around my door and said there were 2 people in the lobby asking for me by my full name. My mother was standing. My mother is always standing when she wants something. My sister was in a chair by the window, with her phone in both hands. I took them into Conference Room B, because Conference Room B has a door and a table and a window onto a hallway where people walk by, and because after 9 years in that family, I do not sit in a closed room with them alone. I asked a colleague to sit outside. She did. She still does not know exactly why. My mother sat down and said, "Nora, honey, sit down. You look exhausted. 4 years, 950 miles. one dead license, and a thumbprint. And she opened with the same sentence. I did not sit down. I opened a folder, and I read 6 numbered statements. I had written them the night before. I read them at a normal speaking volume, and I did not raise my voice once. And when I was done, I closed the folder. One. On a Thursday in March, 4 years ago, a personal guarantee for $41,000 was signed in my name in Washoe County, Nevada. I was in Denver, Colorado, clocked into a workplace, 950 miles away. I have the payroll record, too. The identification presented to that notary was a Nevada driver's license that had been surrendered 11 months earlier. I have the certified record from the state. 3. The notary's journal contains a thumbprint. It is not mine. The state has fingerprint cards on file for both of you, because both of you asked the state for permission to work in the homes of elderly people. 4. I have 5 years of fuel card statements, 1,640 entries. Every one of them is time-stamped. They were produced to me by your own attorney, because I am the owner of record of that company, and the owner of record has a right to the books. You put my name on it to keep it off yours. That decision is now the reason I have every page. 5. I have 9 annual filings, signed by you, each one naming me as the sole managing member. The most recent one was filed 11 days after you folded my chair and put it in a closet. 6. None of this is a request. Nothing in this room is being negotiated. The affidavit was filed in February. The dispute was filed in February. The complaint against the notary was filed in February. I am telling you where things stand as a courtesy, and the courtesy is the last one. My sister said my name once. She said, Nora. My mother put her hand on my sister's arm, and then my mother said the thing she said, and I want you to hear it, because it is the exact size of the person she is. She said, You've always kept score. I said, Yes, and that was all. She waited. She actually waited. I could see her waiting for the argument, because an argument is a thing she knows how to win. She has a binder for it. She has an invoice for it. She had one printed and dated and ready before I ever walked into the kitchen. I did not give her one. I said, Number 7, this conversation is over. I opened the door. I said, Thank you for coming in. And I walked back to my desk and I answered an email about a woman in Aurora whose stepfather had opened 3 credit cards in her name, and my hands were steady. And I have thought about that a great deal since. That my hands were steady, what it cost. Them I had. I am going to tell you this part flatly, because the flatness is the point. In June, a district court in Washoe County vacated the default judgment against me. Vacated means erased. The court agreed I had never been served, because the papers had been mailed to a house I had not lived in for 2 years, and had been signed for by a woman whose handwriting matches every school permission slip of my childhood. $47,300 came off my name in a single afternoon. It did not disappear. Debts do not disappear. It was reassigned to the people who actually signed for it. In July, the Nevada Secretary of State revoked the notary's commission and referred the file to the county district attorney. She had been a notary for 19 years. She is not one now. In August, the state licensing board suspended my sister's certification as a home care aide, pending the outcome of the criminal matter. She has not worked in a house since. Her director of operations title existed inside a company that could not keep its own license once the state took a serious look at who its owner actually was and what the owner had been telling them since February. In September, The tax authority corrected the responsible party designation on $18,400 of unpaid payroll taxes. That number moved from a woman who never received a paycheck to the two people who signed the checks. Callaway Family Care closed on the last day of October. Its clients were transferred to two other agencies. I made one phone call in that entire process, and it was to make certain that the transfer plan for those clients was in place, because those old people did nothing to anyone. My parents sold the lake house in November. It had been pledged as security against a line of credit that my sister guaranteed with a thumbprint. I did not do any of that. I want to be exact. I filed truthful documents on time through the correct channels with my own money, and every single institution that touched them reached its own conclusion. That is the whole trick. That is the entire thing I have to teach anybody. You do not have to be louder than people like my mother. You have to be more correct than they are, for longer than they can stand. The escalation, you to may stand. She started calling in June. The first voicemail was warm. She said she had been thinking about me. She said the family had gotten off track, and she wanted to talk. Just the two of us. No lawyers. The fourth voicemail said I had always been sensitive. The 11th voicemail was left at 1 a.m. and said that I had destroyed my father, that he was not sleeping, and that she hoped I could live with what I had done to a man who worked his whole life. There is no apology in any of them. I have listened to all of them, not once, not in a single second of a single message. Does anyone say the words we took 9 years from you? My father sent one email. It is 4 sentences long. It says that a family is supposed to protect itself, and that I chose strangers over my own blood, and it is signed with his first name, which is the only time in my entire life he has ever signed anything to me that way. I did not answer him. My sister sent me a photograph of her son. That one took me 2 days. Then I wrote back one line, and it is the only line I have sent to any of them. He can find me when he is 18, and I will tell him the truth, and I will not make him choose. She has not written since. The anticlimax. Here is where I am supposed to tell you that they finally understood, that my mother wept and named it, that my father stood at a door in Denver in the rain. None of that happened. It is not going to happen. I did not get my family back. I want to be honest with you, because I think the lie in most of these stories is the ending, and I think that lie hurts people. What I got was smaller. I got my credit back. I got my name back. I got a Tuesday in February where nothing at all happened, and I sat in my apartment and realized my chest did not hurt, and I got one salvaged thread, which is more than most people get. Dolores Hatch is 90 years old. She moved into an assisted living place in Reno after the agency closed, and she calls me every Thursday at 7 p.m. her time, and she does not want to talk about any of this. She wants to know what I had for dinner. In February, I flew out and took her to lunch. She held my hand across the table with both of hers, the way old women do, and she said something I did not expect. She said, "You were the only one who ever sat down." I said, "I did not understand." She said, "Everybody else stood over me, took the blood pressure standing up, wrote on the clipboard standing up, said goodnight standing up, out the door. You went and got the chair from the hall every night. You sat down. Sawandi, Tianwendi, Taundiwan. And I want you to think about what that means. For 9 years, a folding chair was the thing my family did with me. It was the seat at the end of the table for the person who is not permanent. It was the thing my mother closed and carried to a closet while I was still standing in the room, because a folding chair can be put away and a real chair cannot. And every single night of those same 9 years, I was carrying a folding chair into somebody's bedroom and opening it and sitting down in it and staying. Same object. 2 meanings. They used it to say, "You are temporary." I used it to say, "I am staying with you." Only one of those meanings survived. There is a folding chair in my apartment in Denver. It is not the one from my mother's closet. It is the one I found in an alley 8 months after that morning, and carried up 2 flights of stairs, and opened in an empty room, and sat down in and laughed like an idiot for about 10 seconds. It stays by my front door now. I have a real table now. It seats 6. I bought it with my own money at 33 years old, and the first night I owned it, I sat at it alone, and ate a sandwich and did not move for an hour. And when there are 7 people, I bring the folding chair in from the door, and I open it, and I set it at the table. And whoever is sitting in it is not the one who is temporary. They are the one there was room for. In the drawer of that table, there is a blue plastic gas card with a dead magnetic strip. 9 years. My mother handed me that card and told me it was generosity, and what she was actually handing me was a leash, the thing that let her know exactly where I was at 4:15 in the morning on Christmas. She wrote down every one of those mornings 1,640 times. She kept the record. She kept it carefully. She kept it in a cardboard box for 5 years, and then a statute made her hand it to me. My mother said it to me for 9 years, at that table, every time I asked to be paid like a human being. Family doesn't send a bill. She was right. Family doesn't send a bill. Family keeps a record. And so, in the end, did I. If you are sitting somewhere right now with a name that somebody else has been spending, I want you to hear the one thing Ruthie Pike said to me at 2 in the morning over a freight board, because I have said it to 106 people since, and I will say it to you. Write down what they took, not to get even, so that on the day they tell you it never happened, and they will say it calmly, and they will say it kindly, and they will say it kindly, and they will have a page printed and dated and waiting for you. You will have a witness, and the witness will be you. Comment 1 line below, not the whole story, just 1 line, so the next person scrolling past at 4 in the morning knows how many of us there are. I will read every one of them. I have a chair